Um, so welcome to the National Consumer Protection Week's program on identity theft when your credit score isn't really yours. And I would like to thank our presenters today from the CCCSMD, from the Maryland Network Against Domestic Violence, as well as the Office of Human Trafficking Prevention. Our agenda is here before you, and as you'll see, we'll be going through several, segments. And I'd like to introduce Emily Hickox from CCCSMD, Tony Carl Evans from MNADV, and Andrea Nunez from the Office of Human Trafficking Prevention. Excuse me. For those who are not familiar with the Office of Consumer Protection, we are a division of the Howard County Department of Community Resources and Services, and primarily we help resolve disputes between consumers and merchants and tenants and landlords. And if the law is violated, we can handle enforcement actions as well. Emily, I think I'd like to turn this over to you now.
Sure. You can go to the next slide. Good morning, or good afternoon, everyone. Man, this Monday's going pretty quick. We're here to talk to you today about identity theft in a few different capacities, but let's first introduce what identity theft is. So identity theft, and for short, you probably frequently hear it called ID theft, occurs when someone uses a victim's personally identifiable information without their permission to commit fraud against them. So you may hear the term PII a lot, and it's just easier to say than personally identifiable information, but we'll talk about PII throughout this presentation. So who commits ID theft? This is usually committed by an imposter, and we're going to talk in the next slide about what an imposter is. So you can go to the next slide, Tracy. Thanks. So an imposter is someone who pretends to be someone else. Imposters can pretend to be someone the victim knows, such as a family member or a friend, and in some cases, it might actually be that person. In fact, approximately 1/3 of ID theft cases, the crime is committed by a family member or a relative of the victim. Imposters can also pretend to be working for a government, maybe the IRS, that's a frequent one. And imposters can pretend to be from companies that the victim knows about. So they could be someone pretending to be from a utility company or somebody that you usually do business with, so you're not surprised to be receiving communication from them. It can be somebody that wants to fix your computer, a company that's pretending to give out prizes, or a charity asking for donations. The important thing to remember is that imposters are dishonest people who want to steal someone's money or get their PII, their personal information. They might call potential victims on the phone, send an email or a text, and they'll say things like they're calling from tech support about a problem that you might be having on your computer. They might say that you owe money to the IRS or another government agency. They can say that you want a prize, but you have to pay fees to get the prize. It could be pretending to be a friend that's in trouble and needs you to send them money. And it could also be that you received a check from a company for too much money and you need to send back the extra. Imposters might try to get you to pay them by asking you to give a gift card or wire money. These are really big red flags. People who say that you have to pay them are almost always trying to scam you from money. So never send money to people you don't know or when you're not sure where they're from or who they say they are. You can go to the next slide, Tracy. So why do imposters do this, or even people that you know? And here on the screen are just some of the reasons. They could be opening credit card accounts, trying to get a driver's license or apply for benefits. They could just be trying to obtain cash advances from open accounts or use this information to commit another crime. They could also be doing it for life reasons like obtaining utility services. And I think the worst for me is just because they enjoy the thrill of the crime. You can go to the next slide. So we know what imposters are. We know, why, some of the motivations behind why they're taking your information, but how are they stealing your information? So we mentioned PII very vaguely, but what does PII include? It can be your full name and full social security number, your financial information, such as your bank account and routing numbers, your credit card number. It could also be medical data, such as your diagnoses, treatment, medical history, and other information about you, like where you were born, your date of birth, and very commonly your mother's maiden name, and less commonly than we talk about, your passport number. So the way they're stealing this information is by stealing your personal items, such as your wallet or purse. It can be done through mail theft, removing items from your mailbox. Dumpster diving is also a popular way of finding credit card or utility bills, medical insurance information, and even bank statements. So that's why it's really important that you shred anything that has PII on it. It can also be done through social engineering or phishing, which is where they contact you under false pretenses and request this sensitive information. This can be done in person, by phone, and most commonly online through email. Shoulder surfing is common, a little less common now that we're not physically around each other as much since the pandemic, but this is watching over your shoulder as you're typing in passwords or other important credentials. Another, probably the most popular way is by credit and debit card theft. So this is taking the physical card or the numbers and information on the card, and it could also include the signature. I spent about 2 hours this morning dealing with that, so it is very common. It was my second time on the same account. So you have to be really careful with those credit and debit card numbers. Skimming is another approach, and this is when a device reads your credit card information from the magnetic strip on the back, and it records that information onto another electronic storage device. And the man-in-the-middle attack. This is when communication is intercepted between two parties and information is recorded without either party knowing. This is mostly done online. One of the common ways that you see this is with bank websites. It's a fake bank website trying to look like your real bank. Next slide, please. So let's talk about the impacts of ID theft briefly. The impact on a victim is not only about the upfront money they may have gotten or gotten taken by the ID theft, but also it involves a lot of other aspects of your life. So the thief typically has the intent to open accounts in the victim's name with no intention of paying once the accounts are run up. So what does this do? Ultimately, the account becomes delinquent and it plummets the victim's credit score. The lower credit score can ultimately result in the victim not being able to buy a home or rent affordable housing. It can also translate into higher deposit requirements for utility services or higher security deposits. Although you can take recovery steps if you fall victim, these steps can be very time consuming, and in some cases, if the family member is the person committing the crime, you might not be willing to press any charges. So there's other consequences. Other consequences due to the credit impact specifically can be lost job opportunities, denied security clearances, or increased insurance and credit costs, all of which directly impact your ability to find and maintain affordable housing. Social security benefits is one people don't realize that may also be miscalculated, and if someone commits criminal activity using the stolen identity, the victim may experience criminal detainment. In the medical field, doctors may have created fake patients or filed false claims on real patients. When that happens, that could potentially result in severe consequences regarding future treatment with medical misdiagnosis, wrong drug prescriptions, or mistreatment or delay in treatment. And then there's the emotional aspects, the stress and anxiety, and the shame. I can tell you the stress and anxiety I had this morning was not fun. You can go to the next slide, please. So now that we've reviewed a bit on what identity theft is, who commits it, and what the impacts could be, you heard me mention a few times that people may be unwilling to press charges or something about pressing charges. And you may be thinking, well, how do they press charges? Well, there are laws that give some protections for identity theft. In Maryland, the law on identity theft is Criminal Code 8-301, and we're just going to review some of the key elements of that code on the following slides. And this is a lot of fun legal jargon broken down in the simplest way we can provide it. So under the code, a person may not knowingly, willfully, and with fraudulent intent obtain or help another to possess or obtain any personal identifying information of an individual without the consent of that individual in order to use, sell, or transfer the information to get a benefit, credit, goods, service, or other thing of value, or to access health information or health care. And I want you to keep in mind that third bullet there, to get a benefit, credit, goods, service, or other thing of value, because that's going to come up a few times. Next slide, please. Another element of the law is that a person may not knowingly and willfully claim to represent another person without the knowledge and consent of that person, with the intent to solicit, request, or take other action, to otherwise induce another person, or to provide personal identifying information or a payment device number. Tracy, if you could go back one more, I think we skipped one. Thank you. And this is just one more piece of the law, but something really important I want to point out. So a person may not knowingly and willfully assume the identity of another, we're getting the theme, to avoid identification, apprehension, or prosecution for a crime, or with fraudulent intent to get a benefit, credit, goods, service, or other thing of value. And you heard that bullet on the last slide too, those important words. Access health information or health care, or avoid the payment of debt or other legal obligation. So when we go 2 slides forward, I'm going to hand it over to my friend Tony, and she's going to talk about how what happens with that value.
Right, so there are penalties for the crime depending upon how much money was basically stolen in the identity theft. So if it's between $100 and $1,499, it's a misdemeanor in Maryland. The sentence can be less than or equal to a year, and the fine less than or equal to $500. It goes up from there. The rest of them are felonies, $1,500 to $24,999. Sentence less than or equal to 5 years, fine less than or equal to $10,000, and then from $25,000 to $99,999,000, sentence less than or equal to 10 years, and a fine less than or equal to $15,000. And then finally, if they manage to get $100,000 or more, the sentence can be less than or equal to 20 years with a fine of less than or equal to $25,000. So that's not necessarily what will happen, but that is what the law allows. If we go to the next slide, though, there's something really interesting about this code. It allows for restitution, which is going to lead into a section later when I talk about intimate partner violence. Because under this code, you can get back costs, including reasonable attorney's fees, the costs that it took to clear your credit history or your credit rating, for clearing your record or history related to health information or healthcare, or in connection with civil or administrative proceeding to satisfy a debt, lien, judgment, or other obligation of the victim that arose because of the violation. So for example, if you had to pay to your person, the person who stole it ran up your credit card and ran up all these penalties and fees and things, and you had to pay that back because at first you didn't know who did it, and then you find out, they can be ordered to pay restitution of all that money that you paid back plus the attorney's fees that it cost you. So that's really important to know, is that there is a restitution element to this bill, and that is a key thing. So now that you've heard, a little bit about the law and the penalties, I'm going to turn it back over to Tracy, and she's going to talk about child identities.
And forgive the coughing fit at the very beginning of this program. It was very poorly timed. Yes, so one of the things that the Office of Consumer Protection has been working on is really how to protect kids and their identities. And so this next few slides will focus on that special and vulnerable population. Just to give you a sense of how big things are, and you should know that unfortunately identity theft and identity fraud is a severely and woefully underreported crime. However, according to Javelin Strategy Study and a safehome.org study, they were able to determine that in just July 21 to July 22, about 915,000 children were victim of identity theft. And 67% of them claimed that they personally knew the perpetrator. And Emily at the top of the hour did mention that identity theft is often a friendly fire type of a crime. Children are 51 times more vulnerable to identity theft than their parents. Kids that go online earlier and unsupervised on social media are more likely to become victims of identity theft. And 94% of families with a child ID theft victim didn't have an identity theft protection plan in place. And we'll talk about the easiest protection plan a few slides down. But, you know, so 3 out of 4 of these kids who have been a victim of identity theft, roughly 3 out of 4, have known their thieves. So I pulled this quote from Kids Matter Inc. and I thought it was a particularly poignant because it talks about kids that are in the child foster care system and that they are the most vulnerable of this vulnerable population because they have so many different people having access to their PII from their foster parents or their case managers, relatives, and God knows who else is going through. They're having access to their birth certificates, their social security, their date of birth, their full name, all of that. And so that really puts a fine point on that while we as parents or caregivers or guardians can do a lot to protect our kids, we also need to be aware that there are more vulnerable, even more vulnerable kids out there. So why do children's identities have value? Well, think about it. If someone was to steal my identity, I would know about it fairly quickly. It would show up on my credit report. I would probably get some sort of an alert by my bank or creditors. And so we as adults have a lot of foundational support to spot identity theft. But a newborn who shouldn't have a credit profile to begin with won't even know that there is identity theft until they turn 18 and maybe are applying for a school loan or their very first credit card. So when it's a child's identity is stolen, it gives that thief potentially up to 18 years of unfettered, unnoticeable use of that identity. And so that's the reason why it has so much value to these thieves. But how can you determine if your child or a child that you have care of is potentially a victim of identity theft? Obviously, if bills, credit cards, debt collections, offers of credit, mail generally shows up, you know, if that kind shows up in a child's name, that lets you know that the child's identity has made it into, you know, the digital marketing or in the mail marketing lists. And so that's usually a sign to look further. Maybe your child has been denied government benefits. Maybe the IRS is looking for income tax payments. Maybe your child's been denied a student loan due to bad credit. These are obviously major signs of identity theft. And so that, and as I said, later on in this program, when we go through all the resources, there will be a slide that will talk about what we can do and what resources can be put into place to help kids with identity theft. But I'd like to turn this back over to Tony.
Thank you so much. So, one of the things we talk about is that economic abuse is intimate partner violence. And if you go to the next slide, I'll explain how these tie in together. So, economic abuse is part of the power and control wheel for domestic violence. So on that wheel, there are 8 different spokes, you could say, of ways that intimate partners will use power and control in order to keep their victims stuck in a place. And those range from intimidation, coercion, and threats to emotional abuse, isolation, using children, using privilege, threats, as I said, and denying, minimizing, and blaming, and then economic abuse, which is often really, really forgotten. And if we'll go to the next slide, I can talk to you a little bit more about what economic abuse entails. It's basically broken down into 3 different types of abuse. Employment-related abuse that we're not going to really talk about today. That's when somebody goes and harasses the person at work, calls them, texts them, that type of thing. Keeps them from working or harassing them so much at work that they get fired, and so they're not able to have an income. But the types of economic abuse we're talking about are when they're denying access to existing funds and coerced debt, which is done often through identity theft. And so if you look at the next slide, you'll see that identity theft can mean a lot of different things. So what does denying access to money and coercing debt look like? Well, they could be using the victim's bank accounts, debit or credit cards without their approval. They could be applying for credit cards and loans in the victim's name and then running up thousands of dollars in debt, not paying them, getting fees. And so if the victim wants to leave, the victim is kind of stuck because their identity has been stolen in order to run up these debts. And if they try to leave, their credit is ruined. So they can't get an apartment, they can't get a car. Sometimes they can't get a job. All those things that Emily talked about in terms of the consequences of identity theft. Sometimes the abusive partner will force victims to obtain loans or sign financial documents that they don't want to sign. That's that coercion part where they're told that either they will do this or something much worse will happen. Sometimes they may just, especially we have this with people who are not native speakers of English, and they'll put a huge contract in front of them and just tell them, sign here. And the person has no idea what they're signing, but they're trusting their partner that this is a good thing. And what they don't realize is that they've just, signed up to take out a personal loan for X number of thousands of dollars in their name, which their partner has no intention of paying back. And then they'll also do things like refinancing a debt, a mortgage, a car loan, etc., without the victim's approval. And so they can take a car loan that maybe they had in their name, and instead they'll refinance it in the victim's name. So even though they still own the car, they're the owner on the title, they're the owner on the registration. It's the victim's name on all of the financial requirements. So if we can go ahead and go on to the next slide. So when we talk about this, why is this so important? Well, when we look at survivors of intimate partner violence, between 94 and 99% report that economic abuse was part of that intimate partner violence. Let that soak in for a minute. So their studies range, but it's only a 5% difference, and the low end is 94% are saying, yes, economic abuse was part of the way that my intimate partner kept power and control over me. That is larger than any other single number on the power and control wheel. It happens in almost every case. So that's why this is so important that we talk about in terms of this identity theft, coerced debt, and how they're all tied in together with intimate partner violence. And now I am going to turn it over to Andrea, who's going to talk about human trafficking and identity theft.
everyone. I'll bring it home for the PowerPoint. So these slides, I just have a couple here. We're going to give you some examples of how human trafficking victims specifically, have experienced the financial harm from traffickers, and just about everything Tony just reviewed with us applies. So you can go to the next slide, please. Traffickers, first of all, trafficking happens in Howard County, happens across Maryland, happens across the U.S. And so I wouldn't say these are specific to us, or, I think, and Tony chime in there, and I know you've been in this field a long time too. I think these are pretty, every trafficker, uses their own, chooses their own methods of exploiting victims. And so I think these are some of the ones that local victims have experienced, as well as, certainly other parts of the country, applying for benefits in their name. So credit cards, mortgages, which is a little more surprising, I think, sometimes for those of us very outside of our lived experience, but it happens. In addition to just credit cards, benefits, car insurance, hotel rooms where that's involved in just a location that's involved, that's easily could be put in someone else's name by a trafficker. And I think one of our local partners in law enforcement said this very well. In summary, it's literally anything they can put in our name, hold it over their heads, is what our law enforcement has seen, and service partners. So next slide. And why do they do this? If you go to this middle, benefit to a trafficker, again, it's just like a no-brainer, and it is a common tactic used in a lot of cases because it shields them from liability, financially, criminally, just protects them, have someone else's name on the line, and the ability to trace, back to them. And again, that coercive knowledge or just no knowledge at all, it kind of really depends case by case. I think trafficking victims experience that exploitation differently depending on the situation. So sometimes no idea, or like an immigrant, that was a great example Tony gave of, just not understanding. I think we all, even those of us, I think we can all relate to that, whether there's a language barrier or not quite always reading everything we sign or that we click on our phones when we're consenting to terms, right? But yeah, magnify that when you're new in potentially having a real language barrier, maybe new in a country, new to an area, relying on other people that you may not even know that well, right? So, can be with knowledge, without, with barriers, coerced, absolutely the way Tony described. And then the consequences are just really drastic, in addition to, like everyone else, it impacts their credit and just makes it, we focus a lot in our work on trying to reduce barriers for survivors in their survivorship so they can rebuild however they want to rebuild, and rent apartments, buy houses, access credit, maybe student loans even, right? Certainly public benefits, all that stuff, just same way it does for anyone else, and just even more impactful, I'd argue, for that trafficking survivor that's super vulnerable when they, exited and are maybe engaging in, some great services. These are just more and more hits that keep coming, that they have to overcome to move on with their lives. So next slide, please. So how do we do that? I think that's where we're going. Other kind of debt. I think we've been, without traffickers' direct involvement, sometimes that can happen when someone's trafficked, is just accruing a lot of unpaid bills, certainly hospital visits, ER, urgent care, with you potentially victim who has been injured in some way or needs help, assistance, showing up at an ER, maybe without documents, without money, without a credit card, or someone else doing it in their name again. You can certainly, trafficking victims are arrested quite frequently. Not every victim, but often we see this. So costs associated with the criminal justice process, arrests, fines, bond, bail, depending on the situation. All that can be just the debt waiting for them, potentially, if there is maybe like an incarceration, maybe, and coming afterwards, turning into liens, foreclosures, unpaid taxes during the time they were trafficked. All of that, all those kinds of things can basically turn into liens to secured debt that will get collected, or it gets higher in the security process against those victims when they find out about it. Next slide, please. And yeah, all right. So how do we? We want to be helpful here. We, people like me and, kind of in this field, Tony, so many of us, we have a great Maryland Human Trafficking Task Force. I think a lot of good people, certainly Maryland, nationwide, trying to, that I think are increasingly understanding of this reality that victims and survivors face. And so how can we actually try to slowly and, actually help? And so the first one on the left is huge. It's overdue. I think in the trafficking field, I get it, and I try to pay a lot of attention to this. That let's not create solutions that aren't actually helpful for survivors. Let's contract. Let's engage ethically with a whole bunch of survivors with different types of victimizations. There's a lot of different ways you can do it well. Our federal government is starting. Our funder, I'll note, is giving us giving funded task forces a lot of guidance about how we can really beef up, strengthen our survivor engagement in a robust way. And so this is one of the many projects, lines of work they can and should be centrally involved in, helping let their feedback guide us. Not, hey, we thought of this cool idea. What do you think? And will you sign on right after the fact, right? So I'm committed to doing that out of my office. It's going to take time. We have to build up to this point, but that's key, and one I'm very aware of here in Howard. And then having the partnerships, that's a big piece. So people like Emily's organization, connecting survivors when they're maybe in a case management with a great provider, and they want to tackle their credit issues in the best possible way. Having good relationships in Howard and anywhere with organizations who are trained and maybe have some extra training in trauma and working with this specialized population, which does take special training for sure. You need it for the lawyers, you need it ideally for the bankers, for the credit counselor involved. So that, and one of the keys that I have picked up, I include the site from the experts I took this advice from in a presentation not long ago at the bottom here. One of the nits they mentioned is specifically for a trafficking survivor, and I think perhaps for a lot of other IPV survivors, when running those reports, being really slowing down and being really careful about choices around names, addresses, email addresses, maybe creating additional ones, little details I think are really important to be attentive to when working with the survivor. All right, next slide, please. So the last slide I'll show you after this one is an example of one of the, there's one good model out there for a way to maybe remove barriers we're looking at. That's something that maybe we could try to bring here in the future. But what it looks like the thing we can do that would be actually useful and survivor informed is remove as many barriers to the banking and lending processes, credit repair process as we can. I've covered some of this already. So when a survivor is rebuilding, creating potentially microfinancing opportunities that are accessible to them and, don't require criminal record checks and high credit, things like that are some of the things that we're looking ahead to. And I do want to mention on the right, useful change, looking to a survivor. There are more and more well-established national survivor leadership groups that I look to for their opinions on things, like the National Survivor Network. There's others. So there was a federal bill, that did pass. I looked at it was signed in 2021 by the president. This Debt Bondage Repair Act did take some good steps forward in terms of really, in essence, I just have it up here, prohibits consumer reporting agencies from providing consumer reports that contain any negative item of information about a survivor of trafficking from any period during the survivor was being trafficked. So it sounds, I'm sure it's a long bill with a lot of very important details in it, but some, advocating around useful changes to our systems, whether it's federal, state, local level, in bills and our funding streams, budgets, or moral documents. That's kind of advocacy and partnership, and always very well informed and well-rounded in your opinion as possible. Are good moves, good uses of time. Next slide, please. And I think this is the example I mentioned. This is a good this is one of the examples I'm looking at. And I'll certainly ask lots of people like Tony and others on our statewide task force, about it. It was Jessica Emerson who brought this, Tony, to the large conference that we all go to, a lot of us in our field every year. In this Liechtenstein initiative stems from the UN. There's a group called Finance Against Trafficking. And in general, the idea is to have this survivor inclusion initiative, a survivor-focused onboarding process, and you need those partners on the right, participating banks, and those are big, and but a lot of them have retail, like Wells Fargo, Bank of America. These are the banks that are in our community. That's a useful partnership, but there's a whole bunch of very important details. The survivor-focused onboarding process sounds great. Access to basic accounts without barriers. Other things like that. So I've heard of, I think, matching accounts, which sound really interesting, for, the first checking account for a particular survivor, different ways you can structure it. So we in Howard will be, looking if there's good things out there that we can be doing in the future. We won't look to recreate the wheel, and we'll do it collaboratively. And I think that's my last slide. If you want to go forward, Tracy, please. Yeah, I'll stop there and I'll give it back to you, Tracy.
So this segment will go through the resources that are available for you to be able to hold on to in case you or anyone who knows would be interested. When the slides come on to our co-presenters, I'm hoping they will also take the opportunity to tell the listeners a little bit about their organization and what they do, since my coughing fit at the beginning of the hour kind of caused me to jump over that when I was presenting the panelists. If you go to the Office of Consumer Protection's website, under consumer tips, you'll see a guide that we've put together on how you can protect your child's identity. And so it goes into a little further detail, but this slide basically covers the main points, which is you want to keep their PII documentation safe and secure. Literally, if you have a safe, put it in a safe. If you just want to make sure that it's not just really accessible to anyone that could be in your house. You can freeze your child's credit and the credit for any adult that you might have guardianship of. So an adult child, or even if you have guardianship over a parent or other relative. So you can freeze their credit so that there is no ability for anyone to steal their identity. And so you just have to make sure that when the time comes and they need their credit, that you have saved the PIN that the credit reporting agencies provide you so that you can unfreeze it. You want to limit the amount of personal information you share about your child, whether it's shared about your child by yourself or by family members. I mean, we all know we like to share, photos of our kids online or talk about what kinds of things that the kids are doing, but keep in mind that's giving information, not only that you have kids with the following names, but that perhaps, some information about what their background is, where their interests lie, and if they can then be found on social media themselves, it just becomes a track for them. And then, every now and again, put out a request for your child's credit report. See if the freeze is working, if you've chosen to freeze it. And if you've chosen not to freeze it, make sure that it comes back with there is no credit profile, which that's happened with my child. That was great. That's what I wanted to hear. But if it does come back with a credit profile, make sure that what's on there is known to you. Perhaps your child is, my child asked to be put on one of my credit cards so that he could build his credit. So if that's the only thing on his credit report, then that's fine. So you want to also make sure that you are verifying that your child's credit is actually what it should be. I'm going to turn this now over to Emily. If you could tell us a little bit about Consumer Credit Counseling Services of Maryland and the kinds of resources that are available for identity theft victims.
Yeah, thanks, Tracy. I'd be happy to. So CCCSMD is a nonprofit credit counseling organization. And what you see on the slide here is an overview of what we do with all of our clients that come to us for free counseling. So we do a detailed review of financial information. We do that thorough review of your credit report and talk to you about what is appearing on there. Make sure that it does all make sense to you. We develop solutions for overcoming challenges, whether they're with your credit, if you're trying to improve your credit score, get ready for home ownership, or just become debt-free. And we create customized action plans. So we're creating that action plan for you to walk away, tackle your debt, and reach your goals. But what's really important about that last bullet is that we're also giving you an action plan that connects you to any other resources you might need that we can't personally help you with. So we work really hard to build partnerships with organizations like Tony's at MNADV and with the county to make sure that we can connect our clients with other resources that can help them in terms of identity theft or being a survivor of intimate partner violence. So we were very fortunate that just a few months ago, Tony came to our organization and gave our entire staff trauma-informed care training. And what that did for us was it took our counseling to a whole new level, because not only can we do all these things that you see on the slide and all the wonderful things that our counselors do in our sessions, but we were able to do it with a lens that helps us identify red flags that we might be talking with a victim, and also help us to give them more personalized guidance if they need it and connect them with the right resources. So it's important that when you are going to any organization for help, it's great if you can make sure that they're connected to other resources or in partnerships like this. So I love that the people you see here on the phone today, we're not just here today to give you a presentation, but we work together very regularly talking about the different types of identity theft and crimes that are being committed that affect our residents, and then how do we overcome those. So that's just a little bit about us and how we're working to help people through these difficult challenges they might face.
Thank you. I'll turn it over to Tony, if you could tell us a little bit about your organization and then the resources.
Yeah, so I am the Training and Special Projects Administrator for the Maryland Network Against Domestic Violence. We are the state's federally recognized coalition against domestic violence, and so we provide training and technical assistance and systems advocacy and education and outreach throughout the state, and we support our members, which are our domestic violence service providers, which cover all 24 jurisdictions in Maryland. And so we're a coalition. We're made up of numerous groups of people. Our core members are those DVSPs, but we also have allied members and a lot of other community partners that we work with in order to work towards ending intimate partner violence and working on prevention and response. So when it comes to intimate partner violence and human trafficking data, advocacy, and referral, because we work, and that's why I know Andrea, we work, human trafficking and intimate partner violence are so often linked. So we do a lot of work in both areas. And so we do, all of those things. And you can see where I have supporting the comprehensive domestic violence service providers, that if you go to that link, that gives you a list of all of those people, including our allied partners, which include partners with culturally specific community agencies. And then, the other partners include, people like working with Emily's organization, CCCSMD. It includes working with the Maryland Human Trafficking Task Force. It includes working with the National Network to End Domestic Violence. So we work with all of these different groups so that, again, we are not providing direct services. What we are doing is trying to improve the system, and we are trying to ensure that people are getting to the right places. So we do a lot of coalition building, a lot of coordination, and a lot of referral. And with that, I will hand it over to Andrea.
Thanks. My office does a lot of different things. That's why this job is cool for me. I get to, do a lot of this, provide education in a variety of settings to the public, to professionals, to targeted groups of people alongside our outstanding partners. I have to mention them. I'm sorry I didn't sooner. Here in Howard County, we have really outstanding law enforcement partners and Howard County Police and federal agencies, and our services are provided. Victims are offered services at turnaround, all ages, all types of victims. And so those are excellent. We do a lot of this education in partnership, getting as many places as we can with responsible information about trafficking, who to call, things like that if a victim needs services. Second bullet here, we try to do outreach in a really smart way. I think a lot of people talk about outreach and it can be passive usually, and that there's a role for passive, tables and flyers at community events, but we also try to exceed that and do a little bit of targeted face-to-face direct outreach to more and more vulnerable communities. I think our trafficking field's really trying to focus on the vulnerabilities and go a little bit upstream, meet people where they are with their information, with information that's useful to them, whether they're being victimized or not. So we've piloted a small direct outreach effort to migrant workers who are on certain kind of seasonal visas in the county last year, and we're looking to repeat that. We also have a task force that I staff at my office staffs. We also are very excited, this last but not least, this regional navigator program is still relatively new in Maryland. It means basically for victims that are under the age of 24 or under, that there's a dedicated hire, a person who's a civilian, ours works at turnaround, who just really coordinates the heck out of their case and tries to, from day one to really take every opportunity to offer that person services, whatever's appropriate for their situation. And so we have that's a new position that's state funded. I think every county in Maryland has a regional navigator now. So we're focused heavily on growing the referrals. We're talking to our public schools a lot to make sure everyone is calling in, making mandatory reports of child abuse, things like that could lead to trafficking identification. So yeah, I'll stop there and give it back to our host, Tracy.
Well, this was a good opportunity for questions, and we do have some questions in the chat box. So one was, how does one check their credit scores securely and lock it down if desired? So you have the ability of getting one free credit report every year. And so you can go to each of the credit reporting agencies and directly request a copy. So from TransUnion or Equifax or Experian, you can contact them directly, and every quarter you can go to a different credit reporting agency. Or if you would like to get a combined one, you can go to annualcreditreport.com, and that will get you a combined credit report. And then how to lock it down. So I believe that means how do you freeze it? The credit reporting agencies will have a process. It's usually a form that you fill out to freeze it with the big three. I always like to mention two other credit reporting agencies. One is the National Consumer Utilities and Telecommunications Exchange, NCTUE, and they are the ones who provide credit reports to telecom companies like T-Mobile or Verizon, or to utilities. So it is possible to get your identity stolen, and with accounts for phones, cell phones, and Kindles and things of that nature. Not Kindles, but cell phones and like iWatches or whatever. And the other one is Innovis, and Innovis is it's used a lot by landlords, and so because we have a landlord-tenant mission, I do like to talk about Innovis. They don't provide credit scores, but they do provide credit reports. So if you want to review all of your credit reports, the big three is the one that most people know about. But if you want to be completely inclusive, you might want to look at Innovis and NCTUE. The next question is there an income limit for CCCSMD? Your services, Emily, I know you answered in the chat, but since we are recording this program, I thought a verbal answer would be also.
Sure, thank you, Tracy. No, there are no income limits for our services. I did also want to add, if it's okay, the annual creditreport.com. During COVID, they had made your credit report available for free weekly, and that was extended. So normally, the normal process is it's one free report per year. But because of how much identity theft has occurred during COVID, they have extended it to weekly. So you can visit their website and it's probably not necessary to do it every week, but especially if you have been a victim in the past, it's a really great thing that we're able to do that right now.
Yes, thank you. I had forgotten about the pandemic modifications. Are there any other questions? You can put them in the chat or in the Q&A. For folks who maybe missed the beginning of this program, like I said, it is being recorded. It will be on YouTube for under HOCO Community, the OCP playlist, and I will also be providing it to the panelists so that they can also put it on their respective YouTube channels as well. We want to make sure this information gets out. You should have received through the WebEx a copy of the PowerPoint presentation as well, in case you had wanted to review it further as well. And there is, you will be getting a link for the survey, and I'm going to put it in the chat box again, as we would really love to get your feedback on the program as well. So if there's any other questions, we can answer them, or we can simply thank you for your time and for your lunch hour. And a sincere thank you to these amazing panelists. This was a very insightful and informative program. And again, I want to thank you for your participation in our National Consumer Protection Week program. And for folks who can, please follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, as we will be putting out tips and information about consumer protection topics all week. So again, thank you everyone. And with this, we will be ending the program. So I'm going to stop the recording.